Bioshock, a game that has gone down as a classic in the modern era, praised for its unnerving atmosphere and misleading storytelling. It's a game that snuck its way into people's Microsoft consoles in August of 2007, receiving audience acclaim and critical fanfare. What is it about this game that is so amazing? No, seriously, what is it about this game that everyone seems to love to death? I mean, I get the game does a great job of setting up a sense of atmosphere and has a twisting story with interesting theming and motifs, but is that really enough to mark it down as one of the greatest games of all time? Well, let's check it out. The game opens up with the player as Jack, surviving a plane crash and swimming over to a mysterious lighthouse which transports you to the underwater Art Deco wrecked metropolis of Rapture that you have gathered was designed to be the greatest capitalist society in the world. Yeah, doesn't look like it worked out well for him. Upon entering Rapture, you are greeted by a man named Atlas via a radio who guides you to complete tasks and go to locations by killing Voicers, ultimately culminating in you meeting with Andrew Ryan, the creator of Rapture. You kill him, and spoiler alert for those of you living under a rock, it turns out Andrew Ryan is actually the protagonist's father. Atlas is a competitor of Andrew Ryan's whose name is actually Fontaine, and you are a sleeper cell being controlled by Fontaine, who then tries to kill you. You find him and kill him, and depending if you are a good boy or a bad boy, ends with you leaving Rapture to live a fairy tale ending with little demon children you saved, or using them to slaughter mankind. Those are some very subtle differences. Bioshock's gameplay at its core is an FPS, and I don't even want to get into how lackluster it is at that. Like, I'm not even going to mention how it wasn't even in like the top 5 FPSs that came out in 2007. Listen, I get that the focus on this game as being great has never really been on its gunplay, which is concerning, but I think it's worth mentioning that the truest statement about it is that it's serviceable. It's not great, it's not bad, it works. In terms of killing baddies, the difference in this game is the use of plasmids, which grants the user spell-like abilities such as fire, lightning, ice, bees?
No, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah! Open my eyes! My eyes! Ah!
What is this, 2014? I mean, I'm complaining about a game that came out in 2007, so fuck me, right? Plasmids are what set the shooter gameplay apart at all. Although my biggest criticism here is that once you figure out what handful of plasmids you want to use, you'll stick to them and rarely switch between them. Same with tonics, which are the buffs you can add to your character. Once you've found the buffs you like, you'll keep using them until you get the upgraded version of whatever specific buff you're using. And maybe that's the point, right? Like in any RPG, not that I think this is one, you pick what you want to use and keep advancing it, but you feel like there's some sort of gameplay tie to using one thing or another. Like, oh, I'm going to use bows because I like attacking things from a distance, or no, I'm going to use two-handed weapons, which are slower and more risky but deal more damage. In Bioshock, you got fire, which burns them, and lightning, which shocks them. Ooh-wee, all the possibilities. It just seems like they're just different textures for the same thing. And I get that there are some environmental things where you can light oil on the ground with fire, or shock water on the ground with lightning, or make machines easier to hack, as if they were even hard in the first place, but this feels so inconsequential. And can we talk about the hacking for a second? I mean, come on, that stuff seemed totally unnecessary. It just seems so tedious because unless you are a complete moron, you are going to mess those up. Oh no, how am I going to make the hacking toothpaste not touch an alarm? Oh no! Anyway, going back to the plasmids, it just seems that the strategies for managing your plasmids doesn't evolve, and although I have to concede that they aren't bad, they just aren't great. Certainly not worthy of the title masterpiece. Look, I'd obviously be wrong to talk about Bioshock without discussing its atmosphere and world building. These elements are admittedly very good. The underwater world of Rapture is beautifully realized with an Art Deco Atlantean art style where everything has gone to ruin. You learn more about the city from tape recordings spread throughout the city, which is a clever way to have the player learn about the world while maintaining a sense of isolation. The design of the splicers is a very interesting, zombie meets 1950s inspired look that to this day I still haven't seen replicated. The machines are these sorts of DIY rigged appliances that are almost adorable in a weird way. And the Big Daddies, the series mascot, you know, the one in PlayStation All-Stars. Remember that? Well, there's a good reason they leave that kind of impact. They are simultaneously very cute and threatening at the same time. They are docile and make these cute whale noises until you piss them off and then it's,
Oh Lord, he coming.
which is a genuinely impressive feat. And the little sisters have this uncanny vibe thing going on with them that seems intentional. Like, I don't know, they always seemed creepier to me once you healed them or whatever. But the game is really imaginative in how it looks. This is usually where I see a great deal of the praise, and I can't deny this. The game uses these unique aesthetics to present a dark, unnerving atmosphere. But does the game really play like that? Do you really feel at risk at any second? A lot of games that focus on trying to make you feel unnerved limit your ability to save the game. mostly by giving specific save locations, meaning that starting over actually has real consequences and weight. This game doesn't do that. This game allows you to save whenever you want, and this removes any sense of stakes. You can just save before anything that could be an issue happens so that you don't lose anything from dying. The game isn't subtle about when you might get into a difficult situation, mostly because the majority of these situations are fighting big daddies who don't attack unless provoked, so all you have to do is save right before you shoot one, and you can just experiment with what the best way to kill it is, which is almost always spinning around the dang thing until you get the perfect rhythm just to keep shooting its back. And let's say you aren't a cheap bastard like me and do choose to use the Vita chambers, which are basically respawn checkpoints. Is that even really enough of an oh no to even care? Because you don't lose progress, you just lose time and some resources, which never seem to be a huge issue even on the most difficult runs. And enemies still retain damage, making it actually easier on your follow-up. Situations like this should only be easier because you've gone through it before, and are thus more prepared for what's about to happen. Not because the game is designed to make the next encounter easier for you. When you lose that sense of stakes, situations lose the ability to be scary. Sure, the atmosphere can be creepy and ominous, but you'll never really find yourself in a situation that seems like dying is worth anything. This is a form of ludonarrative dissonance. Ludonarrative dissonance is a term coined by Clint Hawking when he talked about Bioshock. Although I don't agree with every part of his article, it is a pretty interesting read, so I'll link it in the description. But ludonarrative dissonance basically means that a game's gameplay contradicts with the story or its thematic ideas. Imagine a game whose story was about being in a disturbing underwater city filled with psychos who were trying to kill you, but dying has no stakes. That's ludonarrative dissonance. See what I did there? And the game does this a lot. Now, the game touches on a lot of different topics from economic and political systems to morality, but the overarching thematic thread that ties these ideas together is the concept of choice, and this to me is the biggest issue with the game. Now, as you can imagine, a game where the character you play as is mind-controlled by the game's true antagonist probably has some interesting stances on choice, and it, being a video game, the quintessential art form for human decision-making, could probably convey this in a really compelling way. The game seems to present this idea that you as a player in a video game, you are truly and essentially devoid of choice, as the paths and story are limited by the game itself. Now, the game isn't explicit about this, it really can't be without being a boring video essay. Not like this one, am I right? But this seems clear based on the interaction with Andrew Ryan in his office.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
He goes on to say the occasional flashbacks are just implanted memories, set up as misdirection so that you wouldn't realize you were being brain controlled. Although you never really do anything with them except see them occasionally as still photos, so you're never really invested in them. It's like the twist was, oh, you know those things where you wondered where their meaning was? It was that they didn't mean anything.
Expectations subverted.
Anyway, the scene culminates with Andrew Ryan demonstrating how you're being mind controlled with the use of the trigger phrase, "would you kindly," and reminds you that a man chooses, a slave obeys, while your character pummels him with a golf club at Andrew Ryan's order. Now this recontextualizes everything you've done up until that point. Going from point A to point B has all been at the behest of Atlas's command, and you never had a choice from the beginning because, like Jack to Atlas, you as a player are left to do what the game forces you to, so just go here or there, even if it doesn't have the most logical sense to it. And this just seems to be so clear given how upfront and direct Andrew Ryan is about it. It's like he's looking at you as a player and not Jack and telling you that you are basically a slave before you kill him. And killing him could have been an interesting idea, except it's all in a cutscene. That's right, the main goal of the game up until that point is resolved in a cutscene. Why not make us as a player kill him or we can't progress? You could make it just as simple as the door being shut, or having an invisible wall, or my personal favorite idea, any input you put into the controller forces you to attack him. Like you try to move out of the way or jump or something, but you hit him instead. This would get the point across in a more effective way in my opinion, and really hit home this game's point that your choice is limited to what the game makes you do. And for a game to talk about how we as players lack choice, to demonstrate that using a cutscene is frustrating and overly self-serving. The game wants to devoid you of choice with the most quintessentially agency-depriving game element, a cutscene, in order to prove its own point, which is clever, I guess, but in doing so forgets its own original thesis. Lacking agency is bad. This is another instance of ludonarrative dissonance, where the game's narrative says lacking choice is bad, but the game restricts you from having choice. Cutscenes in general devoid you of agency, and maybe this game is specifically trying to prove that point? But that isn't news to anyone. No one in the middle of any cutscene goes, "Yay! This is fun." Cutscenes are used to drive the narrative of a game, and it's not like no one knew that. If people were playing games to watch cutscenes, they'd watch movies instead. And I'm not trying to say cutscenes in games are inherently bad, they most certainly aren't. But when giving a lecture on decision making, maybe you should utilize aspects that are generally used to make decisions. This just comes off to me as a mess. Just like the one Ryan's brains left on the floor. Yeesh. The game actively tells you that not being able to choose is bad and makes you weak, but the entire game completely makes you devoid of choice. Now, I'm sure you could say that's the point. That's why killing Fontaine at the end is such a big deal. He's taking your choice away, and since you as the player have largely been lacking choice, killing him will feel like catharsis. Except there are two main issues with this. The first issue is that after you are saved by Tenenbaum and are deprogrammed from being mind-controlled, nothing changes. You are still essentially devoid of choice because the game still plays like the same game. You don't have the option to do more things that demonstrate choice is awesome. You just still have to progress the same mindless way you have been. Even though a significant portion of the game's narrative changed that would make it apropos, the gameplay doesn't change to match. Ludonarrative dissonance. The second issue is that the ending is so boring and uninteresting. Sure, you feel relief because you've accomplished the task of beating the game, but you don't feel a great sense of accomplishment because you beat the guy who took your choice away or because of some sort of worthwhile conclusion to your narrative. The big choice option in the game is between rescuing and harvesting little sisters. Harvesting little sisters, the bad choice, immediately yields more Atom, basically a type of in-game currency. If you rescue them instead, the good choice, you are promised some sort of reward. To me, the option to do either was presented as being arbitrary, and it basically is because all it does is change the final 30-second cutscene. And it's not some big reveal that recontextualizes everything, it's just a normal-ass epilogue story beat. Sure, harvesting gives you instant Atom, but by the time you find one of the vending machines to use it, if you've been rescuing the little sisters, you'll likely already have the reward waiting for you there that makes up the difference. This, mixed with the lack of various RPG elements that the game provides, seems to imply that you are not choosing, that you are in fact a slave. The game just feels like a long big allegory for, you're bad and you should feel bad. The player lacking the choice from the start makes the game feel tedious and irreverent, like it's dragging on forever just to tell you that you're an idiot, piece of garbage for not having the choice it didn't give you. It's just, to quote Hawking, an insult. I had you drag me by the balls this entire time just so you could kick me in the nuts? It's infuriating. This, to me, feels like a true sin. And I want to be clear, I deeply feel that games are art, and great games can be high or fine art. And it isn't inherently a game's job just to be fun the entire time. Heck, I would argue that it isn't even necessarily the game's job to be fun at all if it's being immersive to prove a grander point. A game, or any art, can be moving, reflective, scary, sad, any emotion really, and doesn't have to be fun to be truly worth the experience. But for a game to be so completely neglectful and disrespectful to a person as this game is mind-boggling. Yes, you proved that lacking choice was bad by making your game about not having choice not enjoyable. Congratulations. I went through this game because of how it's regarded as a masterpiece and a true example of games as fine art. To me, this is not fine art. It's a failed attempt at trying to make a point everyone already knew. And listen, I can't take away from people who love this game to death. I can't take away from the people who do believe that this game is fine art. And that is the beauty of art. We can disagree. What doesn't move me might move you, and vice versa. My opinion is far from the be-all, end-all of what's right and wrong. What's worth your time is up to you. A man chooses.
A slave obeys.